people believe that the ruin in southern Africa was the site. But at the start of the 20th
Alright, this is part 2.
Even this legacy was challenged.
Of all the bullshit that these white folks have been hiding.
Now a new
the truth
of explorers emerged.
Who we really are.
They were very different.
And the shit that we
started
and the shit that we
this was a time for archaeology
did.
And science.
Biblical archaeology really started in the mid-1800s when we had mostly theologians, religious figures, going out and trying to confirm people and places and events in the Bible. As time went on, these early geographers and theologians are replaced by professional archaeologists.
One of these new professionals was British-born David Randall McIver, famous for his scientific approach to archaeology.
If we let y'all tell it, y'all white folks said we ain't good for shit
Randall McIver
when we taught y'all everything.
Detailed examinations of Karl Mauch's Ophir. The first thing he did was to date the buildings. By examining the pottery unearthed in the dig, he was able to tell when they were made, and Randall McIver quickly learned something revealing. They are unquestionably African in every detail and belong to a period which is fixed by foreign imports as, in general, medieval. In other words, one of the key foundations of Mauch's Ophir theory was wrong.
David Randall McIver was the first person to identify a medieval date. And dating was really important because all of the foreign origins thesis, going right back to Karl Mauch and his sort of biblical interpretation, depended on Great Zimbabwe being a lot older than it was. Thousands of years older.
See, because millions of years ago,
not built by an ancient and vanished white civilization as was currently believed, but were of purely African origin and that they dated from about the 14th century. A second of his key findings would also be challenged. Mauch was convinced that the structures had been built by Phoenicians with wood and stone brought from Lebanon. Randall McIver assessed and dismissed his interpretations as incredulous and found no such evidence whatsoever.
David Randall McIver said, look, everything I've found here is identical to local African materials, remains, and so on. And he just said, well, that clearly means it must be African. There is no sort of layer underneath.
The style of the buildings cannot be proved to owe anything to foreign influences. All characteristics of Oriental and European architecture are entirely absent.
Absent. We did this. The melanated people. You white people ain't shit.
Following in Randall McIver's footsteps, the formidable British archaeologist Gertrude Caton Thompson led the first all-female excavation of the ruins in 1929. And made the next assault on Mauch's theory of Ophir.
Gertrude Caton Thompson was sent over by the British Association in order to kind of provide a final answer.
Caton Thompson dug deeper in scale than anybody else before her. She sunk 6 trenches into the ground around the main buildings and excavated in areas undisturbed by previous visitors. When she had finished dating the site, she declared,
"Examination of all the existing evidence gathered from every quarter still can produce not one single item that is not in accordance with the claim of a medieval date. If by indigenous we mean an origin born of the country on which they stand, then the ruins are, in my opinion, indigenous in a full sense of the term."
In the early days of archaeology, claims by amateurs, by explorers, could stand for decades before somebody would actually come in and test what they had said and either prove or disprove. So it was a matter of 30 or 40 years before the archaeologists came in and really started excavating and said, yes, this is connected with King Solomon's mines, or no, it isn't. And in the case of that city, the answer was no, it's not. Your claim is wrong.
So everything Mauch had said about the ruins was wrong, even down to the piece of wood he had taken from one of the supporting beams. It had not come from the cedar trees in Lebanon, but was in fact a local African sandalwood.
Malk's scientific techniques were much more primitive than those used today. So, for example, to identify the wood that was used in the structures he found at the Great Zimbabwe, he didn't rely on some elaborate chemical analysis. Instead, he simply looked at the wood and compared it to the wood he was using his own pencil.
And of course there was another factor. Malk was a product of the Victorian age, which had very different views on black Africa.
Malk was convinced that Great Zimbabwe must have been built by white builders, and the idea that it could have been built by an African people didn't come to his mind, which goes along with the European thinking at that time that the African indigenous population was a naturalistic, uncivilized people without a history and without a civilized culture. So believing that Great Zimbabwe might have been built by an African people would have meant a contradiction to this firmly established view.
So does all this mean that Karl Malk's quest turned out to be worthless? In a strange sort of way, no. Because while Malk's conclusions were ridiculed, his discovery of the ancient city in 1871 has turned out to be one of the most important archaeological finds in all of Africa. Known today as Great Zimbabwe or Great House of Stones, these ancient ruins have become one of Africa's most prized national monuments and a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Great Zimbabwe is representative of African achievement, brilliant African achievement in the medieval period.
See, and they saying good African achievement. We taught y'all language, man.
Centuries by ancestors of the Shona people who had settled in the region nearly 1,000 years before and who still inhabit Zimbabwe today. From a peasant village, it grew into a very prosperous political and commercial kingdom from 1150 to 1450 with a population of more than 10,000. Its development and growth was centered on agriculture, mainly cattle, and its massive gold and ivory trade went as far as Arabia and China.
They pillared us and stole all our
Indian beads and so on. So clearly
valuable.
it's part of a much larger trade system. And to conjure up that kind of trade position and to be able to build such a large site and so such a sophisticated site, it must have been controlling all sorts of agricultural resources.
No one is certain why Great Zimbabwe went into decline and was left abandoned in the 15th century.
They fucking put us in slavery, you bitches, and killed us all.
Instability and famine.
Now the whole world can recognise that Great Zimbabwe is a fantastic place, an amazing achievement. Structurally it's an amazing, beautiful place, beautifully built, and so on. But also it's representative of a very sophisticated African culture taking place. Its significance is probably, in its shortest, summed up by the fact that the name of the country derives from it. There are not many countries that derive their name from an archaeological site, and it's well deserved.
If Karl Malk had realised this at the time of his discovery in 1871, he really could have changed the way the world viewed African civilizations.
Hey, this how y'all view us. Y'all sons of bitches flipped the script on us. We taught y'all everything y'all know, and y'all took it for yourself.
But of course,
look all them white fuckers.
Does all this mean that the story of King Solomon's mines is simply a legend?
That's all it is. That bitch don't have shit. Everything he stole from the melanated people.
King Solomon's mines. It mentions the wealth of Solomon, along with wisdom and women, the 3 W's. But it doesn't say where his wealth actually came from. So it's all made up by H. Rider Haggard in his novel, King Solomon's Mines.
Everything's made up by these cracker white motherfuckers.
In the last 100 years,
But I say to you white people, and I want y'all to think on this.
100 years after Malk's
Do you
death,
actually think
nothing was found
that the Most High
that King Solomon
would start life off with a weak specimen. Why would he use a white man
Little by little,
that cannot
modern
stay in the
scientific
sun
archaeologists are
too
finding
long
some evidence.
to watch over the
And
Garden
one of the
of
most
Eve?
exciting discoveries of recent
Why
times
would he
is
start
the
it
evidence
off
of
with a
Solomon's
man
past
that the sun
existence, King
do
David.
not like?
In the early
White
1990s,
skin.
in 394,
So
there
therefore,
was an
there's
inscription
no
found
way
at a site in the
possible
north of Israel,
Adam
Hadad.
could be white and have problems with the
Was from an
sun.
ancient inscription
He's made
dated,
from the earth.
middle of the
So
9th
he wouldn't have a
century
problem
BC.
with nothing on
Inscribed
earth
stone
or in the
contain
air
pieces bait
that
David
shines over earth.
and are identical to the Hebrew and early
So white
Arabic
people,
words for house
you
of
are
God.
the animals that you say
And
that
these
we
words
are.
believed by many
And any
archaeologists
black
to be
person
an
that's
authentic
killing
reference
another
to
black
God.
person is a
They
black
said
person that don't
the
know
king
that they're
from the
black.
house of David had done
They
such and
consider
such.
themselves
A bait
European
house of
because of the
David.
European
That's the
blood
first
that's
mention
in
of
their
David
body
in the
that
house
takes
of David
over
that's ever
for
been
them to
found.
kill one of their own.
If we
You
were talking
guys
in,
kill
say,
your
the late
own
1980s,
way
I
easier
would
than
have
we
said
do.
that there is no evidence whatsoever for either David and Solomon outside the Bible. When the inscription at Tel Dan was found, then that put the debate to rest. It was clear that David did exist. And I really do think it's just a matter of time before there is something attesting to the reign of Solomon.
And that time may not be too far away.
See, because anything you do
An
in the
arid
dark
region in modern-day
will
Jordan,
come to the
south
light.
of the Dead Sea,
And it's gonna
archaeologists
show
believe they may have found
that the
remains
Most
dating around
High
the time of King Solomon
gave
in
us
1000 BC.
melanated
We
skin
found hundreds.
because we
of
are the
ancient
apples of his
mines.
eye.
We found metal production sites, and we decided, just based on the surface remains, that we would start to do an intensive excavation at one of these sites, Khirbat al-Nahas, which in Arabic means the ruins of copper.
And they steady putting these white faces
Assuming that King Solomon did
on
have
everything
mines,
that
one
was
of the things we
dealing
have
with
to ask
black
is, what
people,
kind of mines
with
are they?
melanated
Are they
people.
gold mines?
But
Are
this
they
is exactly
copper
what
mines?
crackers
I
do.
would actually argue they're more likely to be copper mines than he's making his money from the buying and selling of copper.
Copper may not be gold, but during the Bronze Age it was an essential element in the manufacture of tools and weapons, so it was incredibly valuable.
What we discovered was that at Khirbat al-Nahas, there were two major centuries of copper production on an industrial scale, and that was in the 10th century BC and the 9th century BC.
That is the time of Solomon. So some have been wondering whether we've got King Solomon's mines here.
We haven't-
Ain't none of that shit King Solomon's. It belongs to the melanated African people.
The issue of Solomon's mines, or let's say the Solomonic kingdom and its reach, back on the table.
Boy, that's some
So
bullshit.
far, the ancient Greeks, Renaissance adventurers, and Victorian explorers have all tried and failed to find King Solomon's mines. Now the search continues into the 21st century, and maybe the archaeologists in Jordan will discover the source of Solomon's great wealth. Only
So
time
he was
will tell.
stealing from the black people, from the melanated
But
people.
of course, even if they do, there is so far nothing to suggest his wealth has anything to do with someone called the Queen of Sheba. The evidence for her remains entirely elusive,